Welcome to episode 5 of the DWRDNET Stationery Feed. Today on the show, we have Scott Lewis, owner of TriStar Studios. Scott, welcome. Thanks for taking some time to talk today.
Thank you.
So,
Glad to be here.
just to get started, introduce yourself and give a brief overview of TriStar Studios, and then we'll go through the kind of standard questions I've been asking all the guests, and then we'll get into the meat and potatoes of what TriStar Studios is all about, what you make and what you do. Sound good?
Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you
Okay.
for having me. I appreciate it. My name's Scott Lewis. I own a company called TriStar Studios in Middle Tennessee. I've been making pens probably about 8 years now. Started out making what a lot of people would call a kit pen. Did that for about 5 years, and been making custom bespoke pens for about 2 years now. So prior to making pens, I had some experience in a woodworking. I started making cutting boards and various other things, and so I like working with my hands, and I like creating. And so making custom pens for people gives me that sort of creative outlet that I enjoy.
Okay. Yeah, and you can tell if you've never seen Scott's pins, and be sure and look in the show notes or the video description if you're watching the video. We'll have links to his website and social media and whatnot. And even this is one of the first episodes where you're going to want to do video if all possible, because Scott has actually sent some pictures of some of his pins that we're going to be popping up throughout the interview to kind of talk through. But before we get to that, let's start with the basic. What got you into pins and stationery hobby? You said it was a couple years ago. Were you already into pins before you started doing the kit pins, or did the kit pins kind of have a natural progression from the woodworking start?
Um, I think the kit pens sort of evolved from my love of woodworking. As a kid, one of my favorite things to do was work with my mom and my grandparents. They refinished furniture, so they would take a piece of furniture that was painted green or painted white and strip it down and bring it back to the natural wood. And so a few years ago, I started uh, experimenting with refinishing wood myself and refinishing antiques. And although I enjoy that, it takes a pretty good while if you pick up an old piece of furniture somewhere and you start refinishing it. And we enjoy doing that. My wife and I do. But our house eventually got full of furniture. So stumbled into a local woodworking store one day and decided, I could probably make a pen and be able to enjoy the same type of figure that I enjoyed in antique furniture, only on a pen. And at the time, there wasn't anyone that I knew that was making pens. So I took a class, learned how to make these what people would call kit pens, which is basically components that you press together after you've turned the wood. Started making those, had some success with those. I by and large gave a lot of them away, sold a few of them, but just predominantly enjoyed the hobby and experimenting with different kits. About 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, there was a pin turners gathering in our area. And I went to that pin turners gathering with the intent of purchasing materials to do more kit pins with. And I did purchase those. But while I was there was a demonstration. A couple of really, really well known makers, Jim Hines and Nick Pasquale, did a demonstration on making bespoke pens. And I sat through that demonstration. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. And I thought, that's something that I can do. Um, with the kit pens, I can go to kit pens if there are people out there who enjoy kit pens, or I can make a bespoke pen for someone who wants a completely different view, and maybe they want to do calligraphy, or maybe they just enjoy fountain pens. So, um, like anything, there was quite a bit of a learning curve there. I took my time and had a lot of help from people out there in the industry, makers that are out there in the industry, answering questions. And believe me, I had lots of questions. Started making the bespoke pens, and really rather enjoyed it, so much so that I've pretty much quit making kit pens altogether. I still have a bag that I bought at the of materials I bought at the Nashville Pen Turners Gathering that I've not used, because once I started making bespoke pens, I enjoyed it so much. So that's kind of a history of how that evolved. I still enjoy woodworking. I still enjoy making things with my hands and that sort of creative aspect. But being able to go out to my shop and turn a custom pen, whether it's one that I'm making for myself or one that I'm making for someone else, is something that I really enjoy. It kind of gives me that outlet I need from my day job. And it ends up with, what some people would say is a really beautiful pen that they can enjoy for a lifetime.
No, definitely. All of your pins that I've seen are going to be classified as beautiful pins.
Thank
I
you.
mean, they're great to see, and when we show the pictures, it'll show even more. But so, what do you? Okay, so what do you currently have inked? What are you writing with right now?
Oh, okay. So great question. I have a number of pens that I use, and if you're a fountain pen collector, you probably know what that looks like. One of the favorite pens that I have is one that I picked up from John Tello. It's a Piccolo model that he has, and I'll actually show it. I don't know if you can see it there on the screen, but very small pen that fits
Yeah,
in my
it's coming through.
pocket. Um, I can put ink in that and use that every day, put it back in my pocket and go on to my next meeting. Really easy, really beautiful pen. He makes a wonderful pen, Hello Tello Studios. I have, ironically, a number of Kaweco pens that I like using. Again, going with that whole pocket theme. I do not make a pocket model, but for some reason, I gravitate towards those. I also picked up the other day at a um, coffee that I was at, a Diplomat Viper, which was one of the few factory made pens that I have. It's a brown Viper pen, has a really fine nib on it that I enjoy writing with. So um, that, and along with a few pens that I've made myself that I sort of trade in and out in my pen wallet. That's usually what I use, and occasionally I will end up having a pen that someone shows me that I'll trade for. I traded, or actually purchased a pen the other day from another maker that I thought, here's one that I could probably make that, but the material was so beautiful that I don't think I could duplicate that. So ended up picking up a pen from Nick Pasquale the other day that is absolutely amazing. But I usually trade pens in and out. But the one thing that's consistent is I'll usually have one in my pocket, my front pocket.
Gotcha. So, if you had no budget, someone could give you any pin that ever existed, what would it be?
Oh gosh. I just came back from a show in Atlanta and I saw some really beautiful pins, but I didn't allow myself to pick those up. Just because, I look at those pins and I'm the kind of person that if I have something really nice like that, I'm probably going to set it down somewhere and lose it. Um, I, I, I honestly, I will carry. I've got this little big pen that I carry around in my notebook. I've had this pen for years, and I will never lose that pen. But you give me a Visconti or something like that I've spent lots of money on, and the first thing I'll do is either drop it in the driveway and break it, or I will lose it. So I don't allow myself to even venture out there. But there are certainly some beautiful pens out there that I admire, and for people who collect those pens, I certainly admire that. But I am just not. My wife will tell you that I am one of the people that will lose things. So it just isn't worth my investment to try to go there, Derek. But thanks for the ask.
No,
I look at magazines and I think, here's a 14 karat nib, and I would really love to have that pen. But I will tell you, I would be the first one to drop it on the ground or lose it. That's
no,
just how I am, and I admit it.
that's
It's a
fair.
fault.
That's fair. So, what about inks? What are your ink preferences? Or do you stick with the same inks all the time, or do you like to experiment, and get new inks?
Pretty
What
much the
kind of ink? What are you
same.
inking up in your pens?
Pretty much the same. Initially, when I started making pens, I became a fan of the Pilot inks, and I've probably got about 12 different colors of the Pilot inks that I enjoy. The Yamabudo is one of my favorites. Yuyaki is one that I use. Lisa with Octopus, she has introduced me to some new colors, and she certainly has more colors than most people I know. But because I don't carry a lot of different pens, I generally stick to the same brand, and it's the Pilot inks that I enjoy because they're fairly affordable for me. When I make a pen and I send it out to a customer, I generally will include a sample, and hopefully they'll enjoy using the ink just as I have. But there's so many different inks out there. Andurilium makes some really nice inks, but because I don't have a lot of a huge collection of pens, I just pretty much stick to that one brand. I
No,
do
that makes
enjoy
sense.
Yeah, I do enjoy some of the shimmer inks. I've just never really gotten into using those. But there are people out there who, you look through their books and you think, wow, I wish I could do that. I'm a maker. I'm not as talented as some people are in looking at the colors and seeing all the different shades. But I'm opening my eyes, Derek. And if there's some inks out there that I like, I'm probably going to buy it. I came back from Atlanta with two different inks that I thought, I'm going to try putting those in a pen. I generally like taking an ink that matches the pen, but sometimes I like the surprise. If it's a blue pen, maybe I want to put a pink in there. So, um, for those out there who have that sort of vision and that color, that I think I might be just a little bit colorblind sometimes, but um, if it's a blue gray or a blue green, it's hard for me to tell the difference. So I pretty much stick to the basic colors.
No, that makes sense. I have a lot of Oroshizuku. Yamabudo is actually one of the ones I don't have, and it's one of those ones that's been on the list forever that I'm like, oh, I need to get that because
Yep.
it's such a popular ink. But
It's a
so
beautiful color.
yeah, we've covered pens and inks. Now the rest of the last part of the big three. What about paper? What kind of paper
Ah,
do you like writing on?
well, ironically, I have some here. I use this a lot, just because I like the dots, and I'll sit and doodle on that. And if I've got a pen that I've picked up a new ink on, I'll sit there and doodle in that specific one. I don't have a lot of papers out there, and that's one of the reasons that I use in my pens a fine tip, is because I can write on any document or any paper anybody gives me, and it doesn't bleed out too badly. So if I'm going to write with a fountain pen, just to enjoy it, I'll use this rhodia paper, or I'll use paper that I've picked up at Butler Stationery. If I'm just signing documents, I'll make sure that I'm using a fine tip pen because it doesn't bleed out everywhere. And honestly, I enjoy the fine tips more so than any of the other tips, just because I can use just about any paper with it.
Yeah,
There are people out there who, when I sell a fountain pen, uh, they want to write it on just a standard piece of 8.5 by 11 paper. And I'll tell them, the broader the tip, the more bleeding you're going to see unless you invest some money in some really good paper. Paper and ink are probably two of the most critical things that people overlook when they're first getting into the fountain pens. They underestimate the significance of a good paper and a good ink. And I've had people say, "Well, can I just go on Amazon and buy ink, or can I just go on Amazon and buy paper?" You should, you can do that, of course, but if you're going to invest the time, the money, and the effort into buying a really nice fountain pen, regardless of the tip, spend some time and get some good paper. There are a number of brands out there, and you can get them on Amazon, or you can go to a stationery store and just say, what paper do I need? What paper should I use? Because I've purchased this fountain pen, and I want to get the best results that's possible.
no, definitely. That's I know when I started with pens, probably 11 or 12 years ago, I was a Rhodia purist, and then I was kind of out of pens, with the world shut down for a couple of years, and I wasn't using them as much. Now that I've kind of come back in full scale, I bought more papers than I have pens and inks because the paper it's just a whole different beast. But
Mhm.
that is a great message. Experiment with paper. Paper is almost more important than ink in many ways because the paper is going to dictate what inks are going to work well with it. So, that's always great advice for someone who's new. So, we've covered the big three, but this is one of my favorite questions to ask. What is your favorite stationary adjacent item? And by that I mean a bag that you carry your stuff in, a lap desk, a book weight. What's your favorite non-stationary item that you use alongside your stationary stuff?
Oh man, that is a great question, because I am a sucker for anything that I can put pins in, whether it's leather or whether it's made out of fabric. Uh, I don't know why I'm this way, Derek, but I will tell you, if somebody out there has a really nice leather pin roll, I'm drawn in like a fly to a bright light. Uh, and I've got several that I use. One of the ones that it's actually here on my desk that I picked up is this little thing right here, and it just there's a place in there for four different pins. It keeps them separated, things like this. And I'll pick these up when I go to stationery stores if I see one that I like. I've got a few that are just leather pin rolls that I enjoy using. I've picked up several different I guess pin cases at different trade shows that I go to. The leather ones seem to speak to me more so than the rest of them. But things like that, for some reason, I'm drawn to them. I guess it's just sort of sometimes the handcrafted look of them. I like the smell of the leather. I like the texture. I like how they age, and I like how pins look in them. But that's probably the other day I was cleaning up my shop and I had several different pin rolls that were just sitting there on my machine empty, and I'm thinking, how did I end up with this many pin rolls or this many pin sleeves? I don't know, but if you're somebody out there selling those, just know I'm probably going to be one of your customers because I really enjoy cases for pins and rolls for pins and anything like that. Pin sleeves that I can put a pin in. I try to be consistent and keep the same ones, but if I see one that's different that I like, I'll generally buy it. And
I'll
it's
have to look. I actually in 2015 I vended Arkansas with some journal covers and pin sleeves, and I think I still have a couple poking around. I found the other day, so if I
bring
find
those
one,
to
I'll
me.
bring you one of the ones I still have
Yeah,
uh, next time I
I
see you.
was I was at the DC Pen Show last year and spent probably half a day walking around Galen Leather, looking at all of their different pen cases and just opening them up and smelling of the leather. And I guess that's it. I'm just sort of drawn to that. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
I
That
picked this
that
up
sort of
at from yeah, I picked this up from Vanessa at Arkansas, and this thing has been great. It's definitely a go to, and it was Galen's one of those that it's more mainstream, but also like I know John sells a local maker stuff in at
yeah,
Butler, and it's nice to have a mixture of kind of the production esque and the hand, the smaller maker as well, just like pins. You might love your Pilot, but you might want your TriStar the next day, so it gives you variety and choice. So
yeah,
that kind of
yeah.
covers those kind of standard questions I've been asking everybody. So let's get to the important part: TriStar. Now, you already kind of talked about the history and whatnot, so I'm going to skip that question that I had on the list because we've kind of already covered it and get to something that's not pin related, but this is actually how I found out about Scott. I bought this at Butler. It's a little pin tray. And, you know, the best part is the quote on the back: sleep when you're dead. Today we enjoy fountain pens. And, so what got you in? Did this Was this after the pins, after the kit pins, or after the bespoke pins? When did you get into making like the little pin stands? Because that's one of my favorite things. This sits on my desk and holds pins every day.
Yeah, yeah. So it kind of goes along with my love for wood. I had a good friend, Luke Weichman, who runs Papa J Woodworking up in Normal, Illinois, and he had sent me a file and said, "Hey, can you make this? I know you've got a CNC machine. Can you make this file? Can you carve it out of wood?" And I did. And it held two pins, and it looks just very similar to the one that you have there. And I thought, I could make this. I think I could speed this process up a little bit easier on my CNC machine, and I could make um, pin rests that would hold one pin, two pins, three pins, or ever how many pins someone wanted, just by going in there and changing the pattern and creating a different um, profile for it. So I put that together and ran it, made a few of those, and one of the benefits of it was I had plenty of wood because it doesn't take much wood. I had purchased some scrap wood from an individual that was going to throw it away, and I said, I can probably make something out of it. If not a pen, I can make something else. And it turns out that that specific pin rest that you have there was the exact size of that piece of wood I had as far as the width. So all I had to do was make a couple of cuts in it, and then I've got a laser machine and just engrave an inspiring quote on the back of it, whether it be funny or anecdotal, do something like that. And I thought, well, I don't know. I'm probably my worst critic when it comes to things like I don't think anybody's going to be interested in this. It's not something that a lot of people are going to want. It's pretty simple. So I took it over to my friend Jonathan's stationery store, and he said, I think people will be interested in these. And so I took several over there, and I think he sold out of them the first week that he had them, and we made some more of them. But some of the feedback I got was, let's try one with just one pen and see how that looks. And so I went back to the drawing board, got my machine out. I have um, a router table that I just routed out a slot and thought, this probably isn't much. In fact, I made several of them for the Atlanta Pen Show recently and just threw them in a bag. I thought, nobody's really interested in these, but surprisingly, people like stuff to display their pens on. And some people like, I want to hold one pen. Some people want to hold more than one, but I can kind of customize that. So if somebody wanted one that would hold several pens, we could do that. But just again going with the theme of I enjoy woodworking and kind of pushing myself to try new things. That specific one that you have there, I'm not sure why I came up with the idea of putting a quote on the back of it, but I think it was just to get somebody to pick it up and say, okay, what does this one say on the back? Oh, what does that one say on the back? Because if you see it just sitting there on the shelf, you're probably going to say, oh, that's a pin rest. But if you pick it up and turn it over, it's like, oh, what's this one say? And it may speak to an individual if they put a quote about pens, or if I put a quote by someone famous, may speak to them. And it's that simple. Just doing something that kind of goes along with the pen theme, um, whether it's one pen, three pens, two pens. I think it's something that kind of adds to the craft a little bit, and it certainly adds
No,
to my
definitely.
enjoyment.
Because I know I did exactly that. First time I went to Butler Stationery, oh, look at that. It's a pen stand because I didn't have one. And then I look at the back, oh, it's got something on it. So then I looked at every single one that was there and then chose the one. So, I mean, your intuition was exactly correct because that's
Yeah,
exactly what I did.
yeah.
Um,
Pick it up and
which
turn it
is kind
over
of
and see
funny
what
for
it
you to say
says.
that. And I'm like sitting there thinking, yep, I went through each one. It's like, oh, I want this quote. And that's
Yeah,
the one that came home with me.
yeah. Well, if you
So,
pick it up, there's a good chance that you're going to buy it, right?
yeah. Um, So you've talked about your love of woodworking and whatnot. Now, do you prefer working with as you're making pins? Prefer stabilized woods, or do you like the resins, or do you like to do a mix, or do you have a favorite material to work with?
Oh wow. So for the longest time, while I made component pins, kit pins, that's all I used was stabilized wood. And the reason that I enjoy using stabilized wood is because it turns a lot smoother. In my opinion, it looks a lot nicer when it's finished. If you're putting a natural finish on it, or if you're putting a shiny finish on it, I think it looks better. And it's a lot more forgiving for someone who just starts out turning, because wood is very fragile unless it's a hardwood. And if you get into some of the more beautiful burls, and I know you've got some pictures of some there I've made.
I'm actually was just
um,
gonna pop in. I just popped up on the screen if you're watching the video. These are a couple of the pictures Scott sent to me to kind of have to be able to show, and the shine of the wood, the polish and the finish is just great on these, and that really shows the wood. That the resins are nice, but there's something about that wood look that it just it's so unique. You're not going to have two alike.
That's right. And that's one of the things I enjoy about the wood is you can get two different pieces of walnut, turn them into two different pins, and they're each going to be unique. They're going to have different grain patterns. When you get into the burls, the thing that I enjoy about those is I can put those together on a table, and people will come up and look at those pins, and they'll start to see things that maybe I didn't see. And they'll think, well, I had a gentleman at the Atlanta Pen Show. He picked up two pieces of wood, and he was really struggling between buying the two pens, and they were what some people might say these are identical pieces of wood. It's the same wood, but he really kind of went back and forth between those two pens, looking at them before he made a final decision. But to answer your question, I prefer the stabilized woods. Some woods aren't necessarily um, built to be stabilized. If it's a hardwood like ironwood, for example, not necessary to stabilize it. And Bonya wood, you don't necessarily have to stabilize that. But when you get into some of the maple wood, some of the more fragile woods, some of the more fragile burls, I think it works better if those are stabilized. And I can either have those stabilized before I get the material to me, or I can stabilize them once they come to my shop.
No, that's very cool. And along those lines, of kind of a follow up as question, I noticed in a lot of your pins, and I'm trying to see which picture here. Yeah, this one's good. Let me pop this up. Click on the right screen so I can make it show up. So these are actually video clips. This one on the far right. You use a lot of different metal rings and whatnot in your pins. How did that come to be? Was that just an aesthetic thing where you're like, I like the look of how this shows up, or what got you into adding in the metal accent rings? Because I think that makes it accents the wood even more to have that separation, you know, in that look.
Yeah, that's I had a friend of mine. His name's Brett Arnold. He owns Walltown Pens, and he has a model that he sells that has metal rings in it. And I thought, I would love, and I purchased several pens from him. I would love to be able to do something similar to that. So, in order to be able to add the metal components, it's almost critical that you have a metal lathe. So I invested some money a year or so ago in a metal lathe and started experimenting with adding some metal components. Some of them I'll put a clip on as well, but I think the metal components, whether it's a nickel silver or brass or even copper, I think it adds to the authenticity, and it differentiates some of the pens that I make from some of those that you see out there if you go to trade shows or go to any of the pen shows. Not to discount anyone's work, but you can see a lot of different three-part component pens out there that after a while they start to look alike. And surely you can differentiate the resins and make them look a little bit unique. But to really make that pen different and to make it stand out, you're going to look for things, whether it's a clip or whether it's adding metal rings or adding natural components like wood. All those things, I think, differentiate the pens that I make from some of the pens out there that other makers make. And it's not to discount anything that they do. It's just to say that, I don't want to necessarily do the same thing that every other maker is out there doing. I want to evolve my craft and add things that perhaps others haven't necessarily thought of, and use them in a way that if someone else is doing it, use them in a way where I'm not taking their ideas and doing the same thing with the pens that I make. Because I want to be interesting, and I want to be unique with the products that I offer, and I want people when they come by and look at my pens or go on my website to think, that's a little bit different. Maybe this is something that I'll take and invest my hard-earned dollars into and enjoy.
No, and that makes perfect sense because that's one thing I love about maker pins is everybody, you know, essentially a pin is a cylinder of some sort that's going to write, but everybody
Right.
does it in their own unique style, their own, you know, if I look at a wood pin, I'm going to be like, oh, that's a TriStar because they have, the metal rings. That's kind of a unique thing that you don't see many people doing because it is more involved, to do some of that. So it's nice that you've kind of found something that differentiates your pins, and I'll pop this back up. Like in that tray of pins there in the picture you sent, you know, even some of those resins have the wood look to the resin. So it even, it adds in that, that looks like a TriStar pen, even though it's a resin. And then, that makes me think of a question. So I know that you love resins. I've, had coffee with you and Nick before where you both were, like resin goblins, just looking at all the different samples and blanks. Have you gotten to the point of pouring blanks yourself yet, or are you just sourcing blanks from other blank makers?
I mainly source those from other makers. I do have a pressure pot. I've got the molds. I've got the resin. I can make a material that I can use. But I think early on I learned, Derek, that you can either be a blank maker or you can be a pen maker, and there's very few that do both and can balance that time. I had much rather make pens than I had make blanks. And there are people out there, I'm sure, that do a really good job of balancing both, but most people I know, they either make pens or they make blanks. Um, Really hard to do both. I only have a certain amount of time each week that I can devote to making pens and to working in my shop. If there is a specific color that I want or a specific mix that I want, yeah, I can get the pressure pot out, I can get the molds out, I can make a specific color. But there are so many really good makers out there, like Tim Crow, Bob Dupress, Nick Pasquale makes some really, really nice material. There's so many of those folks out there that I'd much rather say, you know what, send me a couple of those blanks and I'll make the pen. And that way I'm not having to spend my time mixing resins, putting it in the pressure pot, waiting for it to cure and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's possible to do both. I'm not one of those people that can balance that really well. And I recognized early on that, like I said, I'd much rather be a pen maker than someone who pours resins and experiments with the colors and that sort of thing. I can do both. I just prefer to make the pen.
No, and that makes sense. What is the saying? You're a jack of all trades, master of none. You know,
Yeah,
just because you can doesn't mean you should. It that
yeah,
makes perfect sense when you can easily just pick up blanks that someone else is, you know, devoted the time into, and then you can do what you love, working with your hands. Because pressure, putting it in the pressure pot, yeah, you're working with your hands a little bit, but you're hitting a button to let it start, and then you're waiting.
yeah. And
You're not actually getting the tactile turning experience.
one of the more enjoyable things that I do is, I like experimenting with different color combinations and different blanks that makers have out there. And when you're a blank maker, most of the time you'll end up with 6 or 8 of the same blanks. And about the third one of those I turn, I'm just like, oh, I don't want to turn this pink green combination again. So, when I go out there and order blanks or pick up material at a trade show, I can kind of go through the bucket and see what colors do I like, and I'm not necessarily having to turn the same pin several times, unless there's something out there that I really like. I'm probably going to do 1 or 2 pins, and then I'm ready to move to a different resin.
No, that makes perfect sense. So I'm going to put another of your pictures up on the screen here. And this is going to be one question that's going to lead into the pin show question. So, one thing I found unique about your pins is you're using the stabilized wood, but then you're making the section out of a colored resin. Do you have a rhyme or reason to how you choose? Do you try and color match in any way the section colors to the wood grain, or is it kind of a surprise? Because that's one thing I like. You open up the pen, it's like surprise. Here's
Yeah,
a cool color you're not expecting. Most people, like you said, there's a lot of three-piece pins where the section and the body and the cap are all going to match. And on yours, it's like, okay, look, it's a three-piece pin. But then you open it up and it catches you off guard. You're like, oh, that's cool. That different look. So how did that come about? Was that just another way of trying to differentiate what you make from others?
yeah, I think so. I've got, if you know very many people that make pens, sometimes myself and other makers will kid one another. Are we pen makers or blank collectors? I literally have tubs of blanks in my shop that I can choose from, and so as I was making resin pens, it was really kind of cool to go out and just choose a resin that I like and make a pen out of it. Oftentimes, I like mixing solids with some of the more intricate swirls, and I enjoyed that kind of off I don't know if you call it off-site or off-putting, but it's more or less, don't make a pen from section, barrel, cap out of the same material. If you can sort of coordinate the section to be a little bit different but yet the same, I think a lot of people, when they open that cap, they expect to see something that matches the barrel or something that matches the cap. And when you have that sort of surprise, particularly on a wood pen, people will open up and you can almost see the expression on their face. They're like, oh, wow, this is interesting. Um, and so, to answer your question, I don't know if I try to match the resin to the wood as much as I do. Hey, does it kind of look okay? Does it look like it coordinates? And when somebody opens that cap, are they going to be pleasantly surprised? I had one the other day that it was a beautiful Cocobolo burl, and when you open the cap, the section piece was a bright pink, and you could almost see the expression. People either loved it or they didn't like it at all, and they quickly went to something else. But I kind of like that surprise factor. I do have the ability to just put the black ebonite in there as well for those of us who are more traditional. You open it up, you expect to see a fully lined wooden pen, and oh, by the way, I'm not really into these crazy colors, but there is an option there to do just a solid color ebonite or a solid color resin as well. But I kind of think it's fun to add that different, those different materials to it. I've only been making the wood pens for maybe 3 months now, and I debuted those at the Atlanta Pen Show. Didn't have any of those up on my website, and it was really kind of fun to watch people's expression as they came and they took the cap off. And I want people to handle those pens. They would take the cap off, and you could almost see, wow, this is fun. Haven't seen anything like this before. So I kind of enjoy that. But if somebody has a specific taste, or maybe they want a black or they want a solid green, we can do those as well.
No, that's the one thing about maker pins that's great is, and I said this when I was talking to Daryl from D Squared Arts. You know, you might come up and hand me a pin, and I'll be like, that's just, I don't like the look of that at all. And then you hand it to the next person, like, I've been looking for this for my entire life, and it's the best pen ever. That material, it speaks to you. Because I know
Yeah,
when I bought my Magnolia pen at Arkansas, I was looking all through the table and stuff, and then I look down and I see the one, and I'm like, oh no, that's it. As
yeah,
soon as I saw that material, I was like, that's the pen that's coming home with me. It was a done deal. So it's just a matter of finding that person who's looking down at your website, or looking down at the table, looking on your website, looking at your Instagram as you're posting new stuff, and they're gonna be, you know what? That's the pin. And even if someone gets it before them, you can find something that's similar, but then it's also going to be a little bit of a surprise when they open it, when they get that, a similar color theme in the section, but it's not going to be exactly the same. And I like that. That's a
yeah.
unique
Derek,
thing with maker pens and materials.
I have made pens before that I finished and put down on the table or put up on the website, and I think, oh my gosh, I must have been colorblind when I made this pen. I cannot believe this. And ironically, that's the first one that someone gravitates to because it's different. Um,
Yeah.
I think we can all agree that everybody has a different taste, and so what appeals to me may be something that you don't necessarily like, and it's a big investment. So I want people to pick out a pen that they like, and if somebody says, "Hey, I like this green and brown pen, but I want a pink section with it," that doesn't sound very nice to me, but to them that may be the perfect pen. So we'll try to make what they want because it's their pen.
Well, and if you think, like you talked about earlier, I'm not 100%, but in general, I will try and match an ink to a pen. So it might be that someone's been waiting for that pink section on a pen to match with the pink ink they've been wanting to buy, but they don't want to
Right.
buy the ink until they know what pen it's going to go in. I know my wife, as she's gotten into pens, as she gets a new ink, well, what pen's that going to go in? Because I love all the ink that's in all the other ones. So then it's like, okay, I guess you're getting a pen to go with it. So it kind of follows
She
along that,
she goes in the
that
opposite
color
direction
matching.
than I go. I go to the pen first, and then I try to choose an ink to go with a pen. But that's
Well, it's
okay.
a little bit of, it's a mixture. I mean, there's been some both ways, but I think that's unique because everybody has their own process. Um, and I'm not. I tend to, once I find an ink that's in a pen, I'm going to put the same one in there because there's a reason I chose that ink. I don't change them very often.
Yeah.
I'm more likely going to put a new ink in a different pen, or find a new pin. That gives it, if nothing else, it's an excuse to look for a new pin to buy. I mean, it's not a bad problem to have if you think about it. Like the Diplomat Viper you talked about, I picked up one of those a while back from Butler actually as well. Mine's the blue one, and that's one of the most fun pins in a while that I've had because that magnetic cap,
I
it's good
love
for
it. Yeah.
fidgeting, and it
Yeah.
writes wonderfully. And at Arkansas, I had 4 or 5 people try it, and I think 3 of them bought one from Vanessa. While we were there at the show, they went up to the shop and they sold out of the Vipers, like day one of the show. Even someone who was working at the Vanessa table, Chandra, she tried mine and she texted the store and was like, "Hey Mike, put one of those aside for me because I need to get one of those."
Yeah.
There's pins like that just have that tactile or visual appeal that who
Yeah. It's like
knew
a
it was
little
going to be
fidget
that thing,
spinner.
but yeah,
It's one of those things, and I may be giving a little trade secret away here, but I'm going to eventually figure out a fountain pen that I can put a magnetic cap on. I don't know, maybe that's out there, but most of my or all of my fountain pens they have a thread cap. But if I could figure out a way to magnetically attach that cap to the body, like they're doing on that Diplomat Viper, I would be a happy camper because that to me is truly unique. It's something that once you start using it, you're like, this is kind of addictive. It's a lot of fun to have that pen in your hand.
yeah, it really is. So I'll pop this picture back up, just and then I'll come back on and we can talk about it. But you said you were recently at Atlanta. Now, was this the first show that you've actually vended this year, or did you vend last year, or did you just go as a attendee?
Well, this is the absolute first show that I had a table set up, and I was really quite terrified. I'll tell you a little bit about that. But I had been to the Atlanta show before, back in 2024. I was there just as an attendee, and really kind of got my feet wet as to what to expect, what sort of materials people were using, how many makers were there, and just thoroughly had a great time. And later went to the DC show and had a similar experience. I didn't set up a table, just kind of went around and looked at the materials and looked at the pens that other makers had. This year, I don't know what I was thinking, but early on, I said, I'm going to try to have a table in Atlanta because it's a 4 hour drive from where I live. I thought, I can go down there and set up 15 or 20 pens and just see how people respond. So I put my name in the hat, got a table, made my hotel reservations, and took 42 pins to the show. My wife and I went down on a Thursday and spent the weekend there, and the response was really very positive. I'm probably going to do that show again, and may even consider doing some other shows as well. But just the support that I had from other makers and the customers that came by and visited with me, it was really gratifying to know that there's a product out there that people come by and they appreciate, they pick it up, they enjoy it. And I've gotten several people have reached out to me after that show and said, we really appreciate you being there. Never knew that there was a wood fountain pen that I would enjoy. It's different, and so I think to answer your question, first show probably won't be my last show. I'm probably going to look at maybe doing some others in 2025, maybe 2026. But by and large, I'm going to continue to try to innovate my product line and put some pens out there that stand out from what others might see or bring to the show, and hopefully have the same kind of positive response that we had at this past show.
No, that sounds great because I know we talked earlier before we started the recording that Arkansas is a great show because it's about 1 extra hour of driving, but it's a nice small show, a decent number of makers, and like you said, and you make a different type of maker pen, and there's going to be a different audience because there's some people they don't travel to the bigger shows; they go to their local show.
Yeah.
But then it's the word of mouth after the fact when their friends see that pen. Oh, what's that pen? What's that pen? Because I know I was watching Lisa Olive Octopus Inc.'s Twitch stream the other day after the Atlanta show where she picked up one of your pens and she showed it on there, and there was a few people like, "Wait, what's that pen?" Who's that? How do I get in contact with them? Because that's actually when I sent you a text asking a question because someone was asking in the studio. It's like, well, I can get an answer to that because I'll just text Scott and ask him. So, it's that word of mouth when people see it because it is different, it's unique. And that's the nice thing. So that kind of leads into my next question of you sell through your website. Where else, besides pin shows on your website, where else can people see your pins? You you were at Atlanta, and I believe Butler Stationery carries some of your pins as well.
Mhm.
So where else? How can people get in touch with you if they wanted to do something different? Is your website your best way, or Instagram? I know you post new stuff up there every so often. How can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, message me on Instagram. I check that several times a day. Also, my website, you can reach out to me on the website. I do plan to be at a couple of more shows in 2025. Right now, I'm planning to be in the St. Louis area for that show. Also, I'll be in DC July 31st through August 3rd. I don't know if I'll have a table in DC because those are pretty well sold out for the time being, but I will be there. The easiest way is to reach out to me on Instagram at TriStar Studio and send me a message.
No, that's great. And my final question as we start to wrap up, and you've touched on this a little bit, but what's next for TriStar Studio?
What's next? Well, I'm going to continue to innovate some of the models that I'm making and add some potentially different burls. I'm not necessarily looking to use just your standard oaks and walnuts and things like that. I'm looking for interesting material that perhaps might be um, something that you don't see every day. And I think from that perspective, each pen will truly be unique. I'll continue to look for ways to make my product different than what you might see out there that other makers have, just because I think it adds some visual appeal. I also, I'm going to continue to work with clips and eventually hope to make some handmade clips to go on some of my pins. So there's the wonderful thing about this craft, this business, is that the possibilities are endless. I know it's a cylindrical object that people have been using for thousands of years to write with, but there's so many different ways that you can innovate and make pens unique. And so I'm going to continue to push myself to do some things that perhaps put me outside of my comfort zone. I have a standing joke with my family. When I start making a different pen model, you got to mess up a few times. And I intentionally moved my burn pit out near my shop because I mess up a lot. What you see there at the pen show or there at Butler Stationery on the shelf, or what you see out there on my website, that's countless hours of me going back to the drawing board, messing things up, starting over. And when you make a fountain pen from scratch, there are so many different opportunities to mess up. And that can be a little bit frustrating at first, but it's how you develop as an artist, how you push things to the next level. So I'm going to continue doing that. I'm going to enjoy the success of when I do get a pen model down, and I can make it fairly quickly. I do enjoy that, but also, I don't want my craft, my business to become stagnant. So I'm going to continue to look for ways to add things to it, whether it be different materials or different shape, or some of the best ideas come from customers that come up and speak with me and say, "Hey, have you thought about this, or have you thought about that?" I'm going to continue to do that, and it's surprising, Derek. I know you probably do this too, but sometimes you wake up in the middle of the night and you have to jot down a note and you think, what if I do this, or what if I do that? I do that from time to time. So, yeah, I think I've only been making fountain pens for a couple of years, but I think this is just the beginning, and I'm looking forward to coming up with some new models and um, you know scratching that itch that all of us makers have, which is to make something truly unique and something that people enjoy.
Well, I would say since you're a big fan of pocket pins for your own use, we need to see a TriStar Studios pocket pin that
Yeah,
you could take. That way you can have one of your own pocket pins in your pocket, because that's great advertising on its own right.
yeah,
Someone asks
yeah,
for a pin to use and you can say, oh yeah, this I made that.
yeah,
It's neat because the pocket pins are really popular now. Like the bigger brands like Benu and Kaweco, obviously, they have their whole, people want every color. Gotta, it's like the Pokemon of pins, gotta catch all
yeah.
the colors.
The
you know
brass,
but
the
pocket
the
pins have,
aluminum.
yeah, the pocket pins seem to be one of the popular things now. And because a pocket pin by its nature, it can be so customized, because most of them are eyedropper fill anyway. The only thing that really limits you is the nib unit, and then other than that, it's just up to the imagination. So, you know,
Yeah,
maybe you're gonna make a um, 5 different woods just in rings that make no sense whatsoever. Like a jalopy pin or something like that, because that would be a good showcase piece of, oh, I can work in woods like this or this or this. Just something different that's going to catch the eye, because then it's a walking billboard that you carry in your pocket of sorts.
yeah.
So,
I had a
and of
thought
course
on
with the
that.
magnetic cap.
I had a thought on that, Derek, and one of the things that I've been guilty of, and how many of us husbands have not been guilty of it, is actually leaving stuff in my pocket and it goes through the washing machine. So if I could make a waterproof pocket pen, that would kind of be the goal. But that's still on the back drawing board for now.
Hey, just add a couple extra turns for the
Yeah,
cap and put an O-ring in there, and then
that's right.
you're good to
That's right.
go.
It's so
So,
convenient to leave it in your pocket. You sometimes you forget it, but yeah, if I could figure out a way to master that.
no, that sounds great. So I think we're going to, wrap things up there. So once again, Scott, thanks for taking some time to talk. I know when we first talked about this at Butler Stationery, about a month ago now, when I said, hey, I think I'm going to start doing these interview things. I want to do one at some point. You know, that was kind of my growth thing. You're talking about making different models. This was something I wanted to add to the YouTube side, because I actually enjoy this, and it's great to be able to talk to people and learn and help promote all of these small makers. And don't forget, if you're a leather maker, reach out to Scott, because then he's going to buy your pin sleeves and cases from you. So, um, definitely reach out. But thanks, Scott, from TriStar Studios, and be sure and look in the video description and the links, or the video description for links we talked about. I'll link to some of the places like Hello Tello and some of the other makers, blank makers that Scott talked about, as well as his website, his social media, contact information, so that you can look into getting one of these, works of art and wood to add into your pin collection. Because while I don't have one yet, that's the blessing and the curse of having pin makers who are local. It might be that I'm meeting up for coffee and they're like, "Hey, look at this new pin." I was like, "Oh man, now it's you
Yeah,
never know if there's a chance that one's going to follow you home." So, you
yeah.
know,
I would consider it a huge honor to have one of my pens in your collection, Derek. So thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you for having me.
no, it'll happen at some point. It's just a matter of, because that's the thing. I love the look of woods, and it'll be interesting to see how they patina over time as well. Because that's one thing, like you're talking about the leather, that patina that they've been used. That I
Hmm.
love that,
Yeah,
and I'm more likely going to carry the pin in my pocket to let it build up some of that character versus a case. And I know that sounds scary to some people, but that's, everybody has their own quirks, and I would love
yeah.
to have that, kind of worn in. But, Scott, thanks again. And don't forget, you can listen to this audio only on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. And I'm working on getting it added to other podcast distributors as well. So stay tuned for that. But be sure, if you listen to audio, pop on video and at least look at some of the pictures that we had on here. There'll be timestamps in the video description, so you can see some of the example pictures that Scott had. Or definitely check out his website and Instagram to see his pins. And we'll leave you there. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.